record. And that was the other thing. You'll be glad to know I did not press record last week. After I went through all the settings to make sure it was recording separate tracks, and then didn't hit record. And I was like,
so you got it from StreamYard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, well done. All right. Here we go. Or not. Ask the Podcast Coach for July 24th, 2021.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music that means it's Saturday. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com, and joining me right over there is the one and only Jim Cullison from theaverageguy.tv. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. Always good to be with you on a Saturday morning. This day in history. So it was on this day, let's just say 1984, I think I'm going to say. Eye of the Tiger, number one on the charts. Eye of the Tiger. Who cannot, when you're podcasting, you need to have the Eye of the Tiger.
The Eye of the Tiger.
The Eye of the Tiger.
And I think that's Rocky 3.
I think it's
4.
I think it's 4.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say 86, actually. I'm pretty sure that's 86, not 84.
And of course,
chat room can help us out.
And of course, Survivor, that band that did that song, went on to have so many hits, such as
that one. Wait, that one. There's another one. I think it was big in Europe.
Or was it the band Europe? Who was another one with one hit?
Oh, yes. The one hit. Yeah, they had the Final Countdown.
The Final Countdown, yeah. And then they did the power ballad, Carrie, which, unfortunately sounded like every other ballad on the thing. So, hey, if you're watching live, tweet out that we are live. I am playing with a new toy. I have an El Gato. I've gone all El Gato in the studio. If you're wondering why I look different, I've got that. But so we've got new things going on here today, and we've even have new cups, and we also need some new coffee going on, don't we?
Yeah, let's get this thing poured.
That's it. Looking good. And of course, that coffee pour is brought to you by our good friend Mark over at podcastbranding.co. I'll give you a great example. I bought all this new stuff this week, and every time I opened up a box, they got to make a first impression. And many times I went to open, I was like, ooh, look, it's this and shiny and bags and all sorts of cool ways that it was packaged. And Mark is great in making you have a great first impression. If you need artwork, if you need a logo, if you need a whole website, if you need a PDF that you're handing out, if you need a podcast brand audit, he does it all. It's over there at podcastbranding.co. And the great thing about it is not only is Mark a great award-winning graphic artist, he's also a podcaster, which is even better. So if you need some sort of artwork to make you look great, check him out over at podcastbranding.co. Oh, so close. And, that's kind of interesting. And
buttons to push this morning. You get your hands full over
I am working both the left and right hand because now I've moved the Roadcaster to the desk. But before we get to that, hold up that mug. There you go. Based on a true story, podcast.com.
We figured out last week. This is that they just cut the this is a wrap around the mug, and they just cut it, and you're seeing the silver through it's super. Here we go. Let's go this way. Super classy. Dan Lefebvre over there, based on a true story, podcast.com. This week, not this week, but I've been listening to some of his podcasts, and that they're all about movies based on a true story, and that movie Lincoln that they just did was done so well, and that the actor tried to mimic his voice and stuff.
Yeah.
You can kind of find out what was, how close were they on this,
or not close in some cases,
or not close at all in some other cases. So if you're a history buff and you're interested, you need add another podcast. Even if you're not a history buff, these are interesting in the sense that you can go back and see, are those movies really based? So Dan, thanks for sponsoring the mug, and thanks for sending this awesome.
Yeah.
This awesome mug. Very, very nice.
I was laughing. I was going to hold up the box to show what I bought, and this is the box that's closest to me, which doesn't but it does show the fun craftsmanship that goes into these boxes.
Boxing is a whole art now. It's like origami, you know?
Yeah. So I went to the Elgato website to buy a mic boom arm. That is the one thing that has not shown up yet. It's $99. And in the process went down a total Elgato rabbit hole. And based on Loria Petrucci's video,
Nicely done. That's a hard name to get. Good work.
I bought the face cam. Now, what I like about this, and it's one of those things where, because I've got right now, I literally have three cameras sitting on top of each other, all of them clipped to a pole. And had I got that one after the C920, I would not own a Sony VZ1. The Sony VZ1 right now is about $8. Actually, it's down. When I bought it, it was close to $1,000. I think I paid $900 for it. Now you can get it for about $7. And for what I'm doing, this is great. Now, the one thing that the ZV1 does is it does the whole autofocus, so I can move this does not. The other thing I love about this camera, there's no microphone on it. And some people are like, what? There's no. So I never have to worry about the whole, oh, crap, I recorded the best interview ever, except it picked up the mic from the camera. So I like that. It has software with it and this is the other thing I really love about it, because Jim knows every time I reboot my computer, I turn orange or white or one of the two. And this, you fire up a software and you can adjust the shutter speed and all sorts of stuff. And then when you click save, it saves it to the actual camera. So when I reboot my computer, my settings are with me. So I was like, that's kind of cool. So I bought that. And then in the process of that, I'm like, well, while I have the wallet out, so that's where I bought 2 key lights, because they have lights. They're now bundling their lights so you can get them somewhat cheaper. And of course, I'm doing all this saying, and I'll just sell my old ones on eBay, which of course I've done none of that. And then I had multiple people say, well, if you're doing that, you got to get a Stream Deck. The Stream Decks are great fun. And I was like, oh, okay. So I've done that. Like I actually, you'll hear it on the recording. Unfortunately, I just found that out. But I have a minute timer on this little thing. And if I want to do a minute long ad, like I did for Mark, I can sit here and kind of make sure I hit my mark and that whole 9 yards. But it does some really cool stuff, which I can't show you right now with OBS, which is that open broadcast software, I think is what it stands for. And so right now I'm using the Elgato face cam, which I also now realize I have to write inspirational quotes on my whiteboard because now that's in the picture. And it's also, it's a much wider view than like the C920, not that much wider, but wider. And then over here, it's
flatter for sure. In other words, sometimes the C920 gets a little, because of its, I don't know what it is, but it gets a little wonky on you the farther back you get. That's going to be a little bit flatter.
Yeah. And then there used to be cables over here running up to my hub that I've now gotten out of the picture. So
I wouldn't write on that whiteboard, just to be honest with you, because it's
going to be distracting.
We're not going to be able to read it. Yeah, we're not going to be able to read it unless you do it pretty big.
Yeah. And if I move that camera over a little bit, you'll see a list of the Libsyn holidays, which is also out of the picture. But yeah, that was me.
But not July 4th, right?
No. Yeah.
Sorry, too soon.
Yeah. No, actually, we were. I thought we weren't, but we were. We were off on the 5th. So
okay, good. Good.
But yeah, so I'm loving it at this point, and it's weird because when you use the C920 with their Logi software, you can actually make it look pretty decent. And so I recorded that, and then I recorded with the face cam from Elgato, and then I did the Sony, and each one looks a little better. Like the Sony ZV-1 looks better than the Elgato because you have a little more, you can do the cool fuzzy background thing, but I just don't know that that's worth, an extra $500. So I will use this for live streaming, and I will use my Sony for any kind of recording for the School of Podcasting. And what I've bought, is there's this cool, and it's any company makes these, but basically I'm going to have all of my cameras equipped with this cool little thing where I press a button and it slides out of the base, I guess you would call it, which is on this screwed in clamp, and then put in the VZ1, and then I'll press a button, pull it out, pop in so it'll be, because right now it's weird. Like if I could turn on my Sony, you'd get a great shot right up my nose, so it's like, that's the other kind of weird thing about it. So, and I realize this is stunning as an audio podcast right now. But
no, I think it's given some people some ideas. We talk about this from time to time. Like, it's the time to swap out my camera. As you're doing this, I'm looking at mine. I'm like, well, is it time to swap it out? Dave, you moved your lights up, and you have them kind of more facing down on you than you do kind of straight on. Couple benefits to that. One is it takes away some glare, some glasses glare of seeing those. So if you do it that way, but it does give you a different look. I think a lot of folks don't realize, the top down lighting looks different than the straight on or even up a couple feet and kind of angled down on you that way. So, you got to kind of mess with, we talk about this from time to time. I think you got to kind of mess with it to get it the way you want it.
The other thing that I notice is it's really pointing out that my hairline now starts back here where it used to start. I'm like, oh, okay. Thanks for letting me, it's,
Well, it happens.
But, it's the other ones I had were Danzy was the name of the lights, and the lights weren't bad, and they came with an arm and that whole 9 yards, but it was about as high as my arm. So I don't know, maybe 3 feet above me. These are like 4, and this one's probably close to 6. So I have 2 here, and the one is way up there, and that's why the background is so much better lit now, where before
it is lit better. Yes. Yeah. Yes, you are right. The background is, it could still come down a smidge, but I know why it's not, like, because you've got it on I think you have it on a panel, right? It's a panel that you have. So ideally it would be great to see it. Although you build a background like that and then your head covers part of it. Right. And so, it's better. I think, to be honest, I think your branding is better here. Yeah. Like down below us on the video where it says Ask the Podcast Coach, because nothing blocks that. Right.
That's true. There you go.
Yeah.
But it was fun. It's and the Stream Deck is pretty cool. It does a lot of stuff, but that's another whole other kind of learning curve. Not a huge one, but
that is something, when you get that kind of automation, but basically what the Stream Deck does for you, kind of automates things. That's kind of a set it and use it thing, and not set it and change it all the time, because when you're doing live programs, or you're doing things, when you're doing live programs, you don't want to have to think like, oh, where did I put that button, and what I do that, and how did I do this? So I watch a lot of podcasters, even including you, Dave, sometimes, and I do this all the time myself. You get this stuff, and then you start monkeying it. You try to maximize it, and you never really get good at it because you don't leave the thing alone. Like, set it up, leave it alone. That way it becomes natural to you.
I have a great example of that. The last band I was in, they now have the technology that you can run sound from your iPad. Like, I can turn up the guitar player and this and that, and the singer would bring that on stage and literally never put it down. Like, every song, he'd sing a little bit to the audience, but the minute it was time for a guitar solo or something, he'd be over there monkeying with it, and then he'd put his mic on his stand, and he's singing we're like, dude, like, the audience is there, not in your, and he just would not, like, set it, like, we've got everybody on stage had a volume knob and things like that, so I could turn up, like, I don't know, it's a novel idea. You have a live audience in front of you. You might want to look at them, so you can, kind of get crazy and things like that. So.
Hey, lots of conversation going on in the chat room right now about International Podcast Day. And I think they announced this week there would be no live 24-hour coverage of that. And in some ways, I don't blame them. Listen, that's like Podcasts Awards. I think International Podcast Day was a lot of work and questionable return. I mean, we all loved it, and there were folks who loved it, but I'm not sure. I file that under the no good deed goes unpunished category in some cases. That was a lot of work for those guys.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think somebody even came up with like another day. Like, somebody was calling it like hooray, hooray for podcast day kind of thing. Like, and I was like, wait, we already have one of those. Don't make another one, Mm-hmm. So it should be kind of interesting. But if they're not going to stream it, then what are they going to do?
I think they're just encouraging. I think it's going to be just a day they encourage people to listen to podcasts. Daniel in the chat room said there are some folks who will be live streaming that day. And there's a lot of things going on live anyway right now. So, it is, when I read the email from him, I thought, well, okay, that makes sense. Cause that's a ton of work.
Well, when you do 24 hours, I know it's Dave and Steve and they can kind of tap each other out, like, okay, well, here, you go sleep from 3 to 5. I'll go.
Yeah. It's still a long day.
It's a long day.
Still a long day.
And so it's, I always appreciate everything they do over there, but, it's a long day. So I don't know. Stefan is asking me, do I have any delay configured with the Rodecaster? As far as I know, it looks like my mouth is in sync with what I'm saying. Yeah. So I what it does is when I use the Sony VZ1 through a cam link, that throws everything through. Well, number one, StreamYard won't even recognize it. Every time I tried to turn it on today just to show Jim, it kicked me out. So it was like, not only was it like, see that? That's hilarious. I turned over here to, it's going to take me a while to get used to that.
Having it right in front of you. It's muscle memory, right? On these things.
It's like, wait, there's no buzzer over here anymore.
Well, muscle memory and important when you're trying to do two things at once. And that's really when it bites you. Yeah. Right. So you just leave it, set it. Now leave it there, Dave. Don't move it again for a while.
Yeah. And the other thing I found that drives me nuts is if you're trying to, number one, don't work with multiple cameras. That's, again, going back to pick one and go with it. But I have found that if you fire up OBS, which is this free kind of live streaming thing, and whatever camera is on, it will probably use that. And then you're like, oh, wait, no, I want the other camera. And it's a nightmare. You have to wait, hold on. I got to turn that camera off, turn this one on and restart OBS. It's kind of weird. I did at one point have it to where they were all three on and I was switching them and I was like, oh, this is kind of fun. But again, just because you can doesn't mean you should. It gets a little crazy and it's just adding complexity that you really don't need. So,
you know what? I think you've inspired me, Dave. I'm sitting here looking at our backdrop today, what's behind the video. So again, audio listeners, sorry about that. You're not seeing it, but every week you change it, give it a different feel, a different look, but you've got kind of this setup. And I think we're coming up on the 500th episode for Home Gadget Geeks here in a couple weeks. I think I'm going to start doing what you do. For live streaming. I like this. I like this idea of a donut, right? To go around the video. Now it doesn't work. If we had 3, then some things start disappearing.
Right.
But for the most part, it's just the two of us. And on Home Gadget Geeks, it's kind of just Mike and I a lot of the time. But I really I kind of want to step up as we talk about the live game a little bit. I really want to, I want to bring something to, because I could leave the black around it, but man, the branding is so good on this with both the title of the podcast above it. And then of course, the brand for the podcast below it. Maybe that's what I'll bring to 500.
There you go.
And start using backdrops.
Well, and I can do things here. Like right now, if I click on this button, you can kind of see it in the upper right-hand corner. There's the podcast branding logo. I could add the Ask the Podcast Coach or everybody's favorite Skype duck, whatever. And all I'm doing is I do this in Canva and every week I come in and I basically find the one from last week.
Yeah. So in Canva, you've got a kind of a standard, right? You made one that's got Ask the Podcast Coach on it. And then,
and so it's here, and I just come in and I delete last week's background, and I'll type in something like, I think this week I typed in lights because I knew we were going to be talking about lights, and except I'm in the wrong spot, and I typed in lights, and this came up, so I could do that, and I'll just grab one here, and then you just resize it, and you can do all sorts of stuff with it. So if I wanted to say that's a little too distracting, plus we lost our branding. So I'll move it backwards, and then I could come in here and say, what if I wanted that to be more blue? I can make it
you're setting the transparency
and things like that. So so and at that point I come down and I change the number, and it's actually, I have a little trick there. I have it there twice to give it a little bit of a shadow so it stands out depending on what it is. Download it and we're done. So, and that's one of those things that you can easily, and I mean super easily, get lost in a huge rabbit hole going, do I want that light or this light, or, and you can really, really get lost And so I'm just like, as soon as I find one, I'm like, yeah, that'll work. Good. That's the choice. I choose that one and off we go. I just found there's a woman named Mel Robbins. She's kind of a Gary V-ish, kind of like, I'm just going to tell you the way it is, straight shooter, likes to drop the occasional F-bomb. And you get the feeling she's kind of a tough girl from New York kind of thing. And her whole thing is, she had a book called The 5-Minute Rule. And here's the 5-minute rule in, 30 seconds. Your brain is divided into two sides. The one side is all automatic. So, the way you drive to work, you eat the same food, you go to the same job, everything's just, your brain's on automatic pilot until you do something different. And at which point the other half of your brain is the emergency brake. And if you give your brain 5 seconds, it will find a reason not to do the new thing. Unless, of course, you're 4 and have no fear, right? So it will do that. And so her whole thing is, like if you have a hard time getting out of bed, when the alarm goes off, instead of hitting, the 5-second rule, instead of hitting the snooze, you just go 5, 4, 3, 2, and then you get up. And it's weird. And if you think about it, ready, set, go is another one. You have all these things, and it's somehow the mental thing, and it kind of works. I've been doing it this week. I actually lost some weight this week using this, getting up and exercising. So that's one of those things where, and honest to goodness, I had this tied into podcasting about 30 seconds ago when I started this, and now I can't remember what we were talking about. When you find the artwork and you're like, that's good enough. I was like, all right, let's act on that before my brain goes, I don't know, that's kind of purple at the bottom, and we're kind of more of a blue thing. It's like, it'll talk your way out of it. So sometimes you take action, but
this has got blue and purple in it. So
it does.
Fine.
Yeah.
It's a good, it's a good call.
And again, I could say, well, I need to move the Ask the Podcast Coach up a little bit and move this up. It's like, you could really go nuts on those details. So this was from Jay in a podcast group. And he says, as a podcaster, if someone, say me, meaning Jay, were to start a blog with FAQs or hot topics about podcasting, what topics would you like to see covered? So I like to call this market research. And he says, just to clarify, this is talking about a blog. I'm not starting a podcast about podcasting, because everybody was like, well, you should start a podcast about podcasting. And he's like, no, I want to start a blog. What would you talk about it? And everybody that said something did not answer his question. What would you want to see on a blog about podcasting? They're all like, oh, you can do this and you can have this transcribed and blah, blah, blah. To which I finally said, Jay, what you're learning here is podcasters don't want to read. They want to listen. They're podcasters. They're audio people. I said, or maybe your idea isn't that great because Blueberry's done this. Colin over at the Podcast Host has a really good FAQ. I've got an FAQ. Like it's not that it's a bad idea, but you're not the first person to have this idea. So maybe that's part of it. And so the other thing when it comes to doing market research, you might be in the wrong Facebook group. And there are quite a few Facebook groups about that. Or you might be asking at the wrong time. I don't know. I just thought it was... So if you do, I tried this once where I had people come on into Zoom meetings and I pitched an idea and I didn't have anybody go, ooh, like, when are you launching that? I want to do, can I sign up now? I had nobody say that. And consequently, that product doesn't exist because I just went, you know what? I thought this was going to be cool and nobody got all hot and bothered about it. And,
It does speak to the Facebook groups and their worthlessness sometimes when they don't really answer the question. Like, take a second, read the question, try to understand where's this person coming from. This is why Facebook is good for some things. For deep questions that require a conversation, they are terrible. It's why I moved a lot of my own support at work away from Facebook. Like if people have if they're asking support questions, to be honest with you, like this question that Fred probably has about WordPress and Libsyn needs to be a phone call, probably. Like it's, there's this big saying going on right now, that meeting could have been an email. In most cases, what I feel like post-pandemic is that email probably should have been a meeting in a lot of ways, right? So These folks are coming in and asking some deep questions, and your listeners do this. I mean, I always encourage, if you're a podcaster and you got listeners and they're asking questions, just talk to them, right? Yeah. Pick up the phone, create a Zoom call, do whatever you need to do. But it's one of those areas where it's smart to just reach back out, I think, and do that. So but in that situation, Dave, nobody answered the question. Like, hey, what do you want me to blog about? Well, why would you want to blog? That's not the question I asked. What if I'm going to blog? What would I blog about? Well, why don't you use a C920?
Yeah,
that's not the question I'm asking, right? So the Facebook groups have gotten these groups have a life cycle. And I think they've outgrown their usefulness in a lot of ways. They're just not as helpful as they used to.
See, and Daniel has the thought that I did. I think the whole "what should I talk about" question is the wrong thing to ask other people when you're starting out. Daniel started his podcast because he had things he wanted to share. That was kind of my thought. I'm like, man, if you're just starting out, like, you should have, hey, I've written 5 blog posts about these. Am I missing anything? Because it was kind of like, it's one of those where, again, he's like maybe starting a blog based on if anybody's interested. And I was like, well, I think you're getting your answer. Nobody's interested.
Well, but he's in a niche group that's maybe not the audience that he's wanting to talk to.
And the other thing, think about it. He's asking podcasters, what topics should I talk about when it comes to podcasting? He should be doing that in author groups or coaching groups, something, because we're like, I don't know, we get all our questions answered here. So again, that goes back to, that may be the wrong group. Not so much the wrong question, but maybe the wrong group. But I'm with Daniel. I'm always kind of like, when somebody goes, I'm starting a podcast, but I don't know what to talk about. I'm like, maybe you shouldn't start a podcast.
Yeah, that's a good sign. That's a good first sign. Like, I want to go on vacation, but I don't know where to go. You're like, okay, then do you need a vacation at that point? I mean, like, you should probably figure out where you're going to go before you just, take off in the car.
Yeah.
So to speak.
And Daniel has a great follow-up. He says, of course, after a while, asking your audience, the one that you've attracted by producing the content you had, right, what they want is great, but that's different from asking a not audience, when you're starting. Yeah, exactly. So it's, Facebook groups are one of those things where, and I won't name it, but I went into one that I used to go in all the time, and it was a ton of, if you want to learn email marketing, I've got a thing. And it was like, I'm pretty sure, like, I'm about 94% sure that was spam.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like, and I scrolled down and it was another one and another one. And it was things like, hey, let's shout out blank, blank, blank in podcasting. And I was like, isn't there a thing called Google? Like, if I wanted to find, a certain type of podcast, I was like, I don't know. So, doctor. Yeah. I've given you an upgrade, coach. You're now a doctor. Coach Dave says, I frankly don't care what people want me to talk about. When I started, no one had the perspective I did. I've heard that so many times. Daniel J. Lewis started his podcast. He was listening to me and Cliff's Ravenscrafts, and I don't know if he was listening to Ray or not, but he had a few he was listening to, and nobody was talking about the stuff that he wanted to talk about. And that's when you go, well, I'll make my own. So Coach Dave says, I did, or even know what to, I did, or even, well, hold on. No one had the perspective I did, or even know what to ask me. I had a very unique perspective. And that's the beautiful thing is then when you start your podcast, you find out that other people probably do have your perspective. They just weren't within your, walking vicinity kind of thing. And then he said they started telling him what they liked after 100 episodes. Yeah.
And sometimes they tell you what they want and you don't want to do it. You're like, you track some listeners and they're like, hey, could you do this? And you're like, no, I don't really want to do that.
Yeah.
And then you got to think about it. You got to think about it for a second. You're like, yeah, maybe I should, if somebody's asking for it.
Well, and that's one of those things where you have to know your why. Because if your goal is to do a short show for busy people who want to do blank, blah, 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 and somebody goes, I wish the show was longer. And you go, really the goal here is a short show for the busy person that's, or if they go, hey, this show's about the Cleveland Browns. And somebody goes, can you talk a little bit about the Steelers? No, this is a Cleveland Browns podcast. So,
Although, I mean, there are moments, I think you have to be listening, where you get some good advice, and you need, even though at first, you cringe a little bit, you kind of go, yeah, I probably should listen to that advice. That should be, I was early in my podcasting. We were just starting to do live video. And we were doing it on Ustream. This is how far back this goes, right? And I didn't, I had a little headset microphone. Eventually I bought actually had a listener send me a Blue Yeti. So I had that, but I had no lighting, none. And I thought it was okay. I had the lights on down here. It was fine. For Christmas, my co-host sent me lights. That's what I got as a Christmas gift.
There's a little
pack lights, little hint, like you need some lighting. And
nothing
I remember
wrong with that.
No, and it kind of looked like that, Dave.
Looks like Halloween.
Pretty dark. I go back and look at some of those older ones. I'm like, wow, but you don't know what you don't know, right? I didn't know in those days. I thought I was fine, but I did a blog post. Speaking of blog posts, I did a blog post comparing the lighting and the non-lighting. And I go back and look at that. I'm like, how did I ever think that was okay? So sometimes you do need that little push or the little advice or the kind of like, hey, did you ever think about, you need that, and you need to listen to it when it comes.
That's it. Well, you know who I would listen to if they had advice?
Our awesome supporters.
And we are talking about, well, first of all,
hey, can I get a little more coffee before
we can get you a little more coffee?
Would that be okay? Yeah. Thanks for this mug, Dan, by the way.
And of course, speaking of mugs and people we like to thank, here, let me do this real quick. I forgot I had this as I was playing and cleaning up my office. I have a cool Dog Podcast Network mug. So there we go. But yeah, James over at the Dog Podcast Network, if you have a little pooch, a little hound, a little four-legged friend, go over to Dog Podcast Network. They have tons of podcasts over there, all about dogs. They're intended to be listened to while you walk your little friend around the park, around the block, whatever you're doing. Check it out over at dogpodcastnetwork.com. We also want to thank our awesome $20 supporters, people like Ed Sullivan over at soniccupcake.com, Felix over at the LatinPodcastAwards.com, Glenn the Geek at horseradionetwork.com, who is officially now out on the road. He will be in Ohio in August. So if you go to neohiopodcasters.com, you'll see the meetup in August is going to be with Glenn at Luigi's Pizza. So, and if you're not in Ohio, you should be here. Luigi's is really good. Max Trescott at aviationnewstalk.com. If you are a pilot or like all things airplanes, check him out. Michael Delaney over at Baby Mountain Radio Productions, where podcasting and hard work are made fun. Find him at babymountainradio.com. Brock over at the Occupied Podcast. So if you're into occupational therapy, it's a creative project exploring all things occupation, occupation science, and occupation therapy. Kim Craggy over at Toastmasters101.net. If you need to develop your voice, reduce your editing time, or improve your content, Toastmasters101.net. Greg over at DebtShepherd.com, where he's teaching financial wellness. Shane at Spybrary.com. So if you like that whole spy, James Bond kind of stuff, you will like Spybrary.com. Greg over at the Indie Drop-In Network. If you have a true crime, a comedy, or a scary time kind of story, check out the Indie Drop-In Network. You basically hand him your episode and he puts it in front of his audience. It's a great way to grow your audience. If you'd like to be an awesome supporter, you can go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. And if you'd like to do a one-time donation or many other ways to sponsor the show, just go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/store. So thanks to everyone for that. This is the transition I can't get, which is getting the PowerPoint off the page so I can go back to the what you call it, the Trello board.
Back to the show. You know what I wish StreamYard had the ability for me to, like, you could give me the ability to bring up the chat room, to bring in so we could do it together, because that would be a good transition. Like when you finish that, then I could pull in a chat, right? And we could So if I could, I would do the one that Coach Dave just put about. He said, I started podcasting my youth soccer development show to take the load off my email inbox as a club president. The FAQs were brutal. Hurt my fingers to keep responding to so many messages. This isn't the only reason you start a podcast, but I think it's a really good reason when you're thinking like, how could I replace static content that's not an FAQ, because nobody reads FAQs,
right?
And keep a community in in the know, so to speak. That's what I do at Gallup, right? We created this for our customers. I think, Dave, that's a great reason, not the only one, but it is a really, really great reason to start a podcast.
I know more and more companies are offering private podcasts. I know Blueberry does, Libsyn does, there's Supercast, there's all sorts of different places. And for me, I always saw the sales meeting as a great podcast, because my first job out of college, so this is 93-ish, and I lived in Akron. I would drive a half hour to Canton, Ohio. We had people driving a half hour north. I was driving south. So we had people from all over Ohio going to the headquarters. We would go in the basement to watch the sales guy go, here's where we're at. We need to go sell more. Get out there, win one for the Gipper, rah, Graphic Enterprises, and off we go. And then I would go out and start working on copiers and that whole, and I look at that now and go, that could be such a great podcast. Say, hey, I want to, good job, Susie, for lead. She was the sales leader in June. Great job for that. If you haven't got certified on the new copier yet, there's tutorials on that. Blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. Win one for the Gipper. Now get out there. And you could do that on your way to your first sales call. And I'm like, you're not wasting people's time. You're not paying for mileage for people to drive to the to the office. I was like, to me, that was like a great way to use podcasting. And then you could have something like StreamYard or whatever. Podpage has a built-in voicemail button. You could do all sorts of ways to have people contribute that way. So
we've even figured out how to move that audio to Teams behind our Teams firewall, and you can play it now that we have Teams on our phone. You can play it right off your phone like a podcast, and it's protected. So inside an organization, you could put out content and not have to worry about it even being on a feed if you have that kind of if you've got Teams and that kind of Microsoft environment set up at work. So there are just other ways to do it as well. Dave, I was a part of an organization years ago. This was before Gallup, and we do this all hands meeting. Like, it was like 4 hours long, like, I think once a month. And I started looking around the room and the expensive resources were in there for 4 hours. And I pitched the idea I said, this is back in the days of the iPod. So this was even before we had iPhones. I said, you should buy everybody in the company an iPod.
Yeah.
And then turn these 4 hour meetings into a podcast, and they just have to download it. And listen, they have to download it and listen to it. And for that, they get an iPod that they can listen to other podcasts on. And we were and I even had the numbers justified. Like in 4 months, it was paid for, and we got really, really close to doing it. And at the end, the CEO said, I think I'm not going to do this. And I found out later the next week he sold the company. So it was like, that's why we didn't buy those. But I always thought that'd be a great idea to do, get those meetings. That meeting could have been a podcast. Maybe that's the new saying that meeting, it could have been a podcast.
That's it. Stefan says there's a help desk software which has a read the manual button. It would send out a response with a read the manual message. In this case, read the FAQ. Yeah. I always tell people, businesses, I go, if you're starting a podcast, the first place you want to start with are those FAQs that you like, if I have to answer that question, like, Jim, what's a strengths finder question that you get all the time?
Oh, where to find resources. Yeah. Like, hey, where is this resource? That I get those. But hold on, let me cut you short here on this, Dave. It doesn't matter. Even if you make podcasts, people won't listen. Right. They want to be told. Like, there's just a certain segment of the population that no matter how much help you give them, no matter how you make it or how easy you deliver it to them, whatever, they're like, oh yeah, I didn't read that. Or no, I didn't have time, or I'm too busy. And can you just tell me? And so you're always going to have those people, like Jesus said, those people will always be among us.
Yeah. What I've said is I will answer the question and say, I talk about this in this episode, knowing that they're not going to listen, but hoping that when they go over there, they're going to see the other questions that they're also going to ask and maybe send me those. Mike from Blueberry, I have one of those in our ticket system. I have one that I use Text Expander, and one is I always type a hashtag before I type the thing that then triggers Text Expander, and my one hashtag is hashtag WTF, because they didn't write in from the email that they signed up with. They've said basically my podcast is broken, and that's it. So it's kind of like, I don't know who you are, I don't know what your podcast is, and I don't know what the problem is, and you want me to fix it. So I just go, and when I type that, it's like, hey, thank you so much for, first it lets me put in their name, and then I try to look up your email with this. I can't find your account. Can you please let me know the name of your podcast and the email that you use to log into? So yeah, those are ones that, but I've had, I forget his name. He was a real estate guy. And he said, he started off with those FAQs, and he said exactly what I had said is that people they would ask him, the FAQ, he'd send them over there to listen. He goes, and then they would come back a little better educated because they would listen to other episodes. So that's always kind of fun.
Well, we tell our customers all the time, I put this in we talked about this in this. Oh, I don't have time to listen to that. But you have time for me to write out an email back to you and you read it. That makes a lot of sense. Can you just go listen to the audio that I already created?
Yeah. Yeah. That's always, well, I mean, we have at Libsyn, there's an onboarding process, and we can see exactly how many people go through that and the many, many people that do not, that then go, why isn't my show in Apple? And you're like, oh, okay, you didn't go through the thing. So Kenny says, summer times are tough to be consistent due to the heat. I've been using our live show recordings to fill in from time to time. Does anyone else have this problem, and do you see issues with this? My problem with not so much being consistent because of the heat, it's hard to be consistent when there are funner things to do. Like, I want to go outside and play. I don't want to sit here and edit audio all day. So it takes maybe a little more dedication. I know I have a couple weeks now where this is Saturday. I want to go play. It's supposed to be like 78 today. I was like, oh, I am so riding my bike. And instead of taking the separate tracks and, going, I kind of scale back on some of the icing that I put on the cupcake. And so far, nobody's complained. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to use the stereo track. What I heard in my headphones was fine. I'm not going to worry. And I've yet to have anybody say, hey, did you do something different to the audio? I'm like, nope. So
they're not gonna.
Yeah.
Like they're not gonna. They just don't.
But I could see if it was, I lived in a house once, and I got, I don't know if it was smart or not. I had this huge attic that was, it had been, what's the word, finished, I guess, or whatever it had. It was nothing but places to store stuff, all sorts of drawers and stuff. But I put a desk up there, had the internet wired up there, and then found out that there was absolutely no insulation. So I froze in the winter, and it was so hot in the attic that my computer would shut off.
Yeah.
So that was one where I learned, okay, I guess I'll be podcasting in the evening when it's not 9 million degrees in the attic.
But that question also applies seasonally, Christmas time, right? What do you do during it seems like we have 1,000 holidays in December and January, and then they all dry up in the spring. Not that I'm bitter about that or anything, but it's like, spread them out, people. But those times when life kind of gets in the way. This last year, maybe life didn't get so much in the way. We had a lot of time on our hands. I think we kind of stopped talking about this, but I think it's going to be a subject. How is podcasting going to change post-pandemic? And I think we're already starting to see where folks who had all the time to do this, committed and created a whole thing, are now like, well, I got to go do something else. Like, my life's gotten back to whatever normality was. So I think we're going to see, we've already seen a lot of pod fading that's happened already. I think we're going to see a ton more as we move into the winter.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And hopefully, if you haven't heard this, because being that it's almost the end of July, if you are looking at your stats and June was down considerably compared to July, Apple had a problem. And I just listened to Podland with James Cridlin, and he did say Apple has fixed that. So I'm assuming that means it's public. So, and what it was doing was it wasn't doing the automatic download thing. So if you were following somebody in Apple, it wasn't, you had to go click to listen, which is fine if you're on Wi-Fi or whatever. But consequently, some people's numbers, and I saw where one report came out that said in June, like advertising was down. I'm like, everything's going to be down because, these automatic downloads weren't happening. So that'll be kind of hopefully July, will go up. But I'm going to be interested to see with this post-pandemic thing to see if these shows that were started, because there were a lot of people, I've heard celebrities especially, they're like, well, I couldn't act, and I've got money in the bank, so I don't have to worry about, so I just started a podcast, and it's like, and some of them got 60 million from Amazon and many of them did not. So the Justin Bateman, I forget the name of it, the other guy from, it's three guys that you go, oh yeah, I've seen them in stuff, but I forget the name.
Yeah, you couldn't, in a lineup, you couldn't differentiate. You wouldn't know their names. You're like, oh, they look familiar, but I don't know who they are.
It's like that guy's from the show
Seth Rogen, and they're all it's all the same person. It'll be interesting to see, I think, here in the United States this fall when school starts again. And listen, we're not out of the woods yet. We got some things going on here, but it's going to look like we're going to be back in most cases, full classrooms, full activities. I'm already seeing soccer fields and baseball fields filled up this summer, right? So it'll be interesting to see as we go into the fall. I think some folks are going to take a hiatus in the summer. Be like, okay, well, summer's busy. They're going to get in the fall, and there's going to be all those things that they're going to go back to, all those youth events and all those choir concerts and all those musicals and all that stuff that have to go on. And they're just never going to come back. They'll be like, yeah, life got too busy. So if you picked up a new podcast during the pandemic and it starts to wane, you're like, oh, might want to write it off.
Yeah. Mike Dell says listening seems to be lower this summer. Yeah, I know at Libsyn, we always, I always say podcasting is a winter sport because we're kind of locked indoors and can't go out, and they're like, all right, I guess I'll just communicate on a microphone here. And so we always see a little bit of a dip in the summer. It's a dip. It's like, wow, okay, which is great. You're kind of like, all right, I guess I'll catch up on my Netflix while I'm sitting here doing tickets. But
a dip from what though? Like a dip from pandemic numbers, or a dip from pre-pandemic numbers? It's
just the fact that, like, wow, I know we always get a little slower in the summer, and it's like, and you know what it probably is, because of the pandemic, we had this big rise, so we were getting slammed with tickets, and now that it's summer and everybody has said, oh, school's out for summer, and off they leave, there's just not as many tickets. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, it'll be a new reality. We'll see one way or another. This is an area where we're just going to have to see what happens this fall. If the number of, to be honest, for the average podcaster, that means nothing. To be honest, like, so what? So what if people are? In fact, it's better if they're not. You have more ears out there to listen to your podcast.
Well, there's an app called Good Pods, and I like the people that make it. I love the idea. It's similar to Goodreads. And the idea is if you use the app, you can see what your friends are listening to, and hence like, oh, wow, if Jim liked that, I probably might like that then, kind of thing. And they added a button to where you can filter by indie. And I was like, well, there's something. I'll give them kudos. Like, that's not in any other app I've ever seen.
How are they determining indie?
That was one of my questions. And also, like, I don't know that I don't really care where I don't care where it originated. I care, does it deliver value or not? Like, when I was growing up, I could look at an album and like, oh, this was produced by Mutt Lange, or this was on this record label or whatever that. And the reason I knew all that stuff is I couldn't sample it for free. It wasn't on the radio, and if I wanted to listen to that album, I had to put out money. So I knew all these details, and I would say, well, it's got the same engineer as so and so, and it's been produced by so and so who also produced this person and that person. I'm going to buy this. Where now, I can hit a podcast and go, yeah, I don't like that, and leave. So it's not quite as, you don't have to be quite as picky to try something now. You can try it for free, and if it doesn't work, So I'm not quite sure that if I see something's from Gimlet, I kind of know what to expect, but I don't listen to it. Like, I don't go searching for Gimlet shows. It's a little different.
Yeah, but what does indie mean?
Indie means there's no 18 people at the end of the show, but that's not really true because Joe Rogan is indie. Now
Is he?
Well, he was, but it's him and like 3 people. Jen Briney.
So what number do you use to cut it off at? Is it 3? Is it 7? Is it if they're taking advertising? Are they independent? I mean, if I'm a full-time podcaster, if I'm a full-time podcaster / YouTuber, and I'm making money off YouTube, but also creating a podcast, does that mean I'm still indie? If I'm creating, I don't know what indie means.
Does it just mean you're not on it? Does it just mean you're not on a network?
Yeah. See, I wouldn't, as a podcaster, I'm going to, if it's going to give me an advantage, I'm going to click it.
Yeah.
whether I do or not. I mean, I don't get this. I've never really got why we think being indie is so important. I've never really got that part.
Daniel says, I think indie is defined by who makes the ultimate decisions and has nothing to do with money. Could be. Yeah. There's no board of directors that you have to answer to. There's no sponsors.
It's super subjective.
Yeah, it really is.
It is super suggestive. Yeah. And by the way, some folks who want to be the ones to benefit from being labeled as indie are the ones that want to label others who want to be indie as non-indie. I mean, it's kind of I don't know if it's a conversation. I mean, I don't know if there's a way to classify it, to be honest. I don't know if there's a fair way to say who is and who isn't. It seems like a judgment call to me.
Yeah. Coach Dave, my podcast started a few competitor podcasts, other clubs tracking what I do. They subscribe to everything I publish, then go do it for their clubs. It's a little, speaking of that.
And now it's time for a power rant.
Yeah. I'm impressed that you listen to my show. Please don't steal my tagline. When I started saying, thank you for joining me on my mission to rid the world of boring podcasts, and you changed it to, thank you for joining me on my mission to rid the world of crappy podcasts. I'm impressed. Thank you. It's flattering, but I'm kind of like, really? Like, that was one that I was like, well, I didn't patent it. I didn't trademark it. It's like, it's a free world, but I was like, that's one of those where you want to go, let's go to the tape and see who said that first. Doggone it. But, so there will be ripoffs. That's just the way it is. How much you can do about this.
Well, what do we say? Imitation is a sincerest form of flattery.
Yeah.
Right. And so, you can't, unless you listen, I do this for a living. And the amount of theft.
Oh, I can only imagine.
It is just brutal, Dave. It is just brutal. So you kind of have to manage it. I mean, if they're quoting you, that's not such a bad thing. Right.
I'm like, well, at least it shows they're listening. But I heard that today and was like, wow, like why is everybody on a mission now? Like, it's like, okay, whatever. But who's on a mission here is Michael's going to join us here on the stream. Michael, how are you?
I'm just great, Dave and Jim. I'm getting ready to start my new podcast called Ask the Podcast Teacher.
There we go. Excellent.
You see, I have the T-shirt almost. I just changed this little section down here.
Just cross that out, Cross that out right in with a white marker.
Exactly. It'll all work out. I have an actual, by the way, that's an antique microphone you've got there, Jim. They don't make those anymore.
Not the 2100, not the pure 2100s. No, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I have like 3 or 4 of them. I've given them all away.
There you go.
Good microphone. I don't know why they discontinued it and charge more for the new one.
Because they could.
Yeah, because they can.
Yeah,
they realized they messed up the first time they put these out and they charged too little for them. And
that's it.
And then when they did that, these folks came in for $65.
That's right.
And took the market away from them.
That's a Q2U for those audio folks. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I actually have a question.
Okay.
And I'm all in it to there. I've been using Adobe Audition forever.
Yep.
And I'm looking at Descript, And I tried it when it first came out, and it was disjointed, and I didn't like it. But I just watched Pat Flynn do a video about how he edits video with it now and audio and puts it all together, and it's real easy. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are I need to go watch Pat Flynn's video. I've heard people rave about this. Here's what I've been doing. I take my audio, I throw it in there, I say, find the filler words, remove them all, and export. And for months, I was like, this is awesome. And then I'll take it from there and, do my thing in where I'm comfortable with it. And the last 3 times I've done that, I've had a few edits where it's just a little wonky. Like it's not. Yeah. And I was like, well, that kind of stinks because that's what I was using it for. So that's where I'm like, I probably need to watch a video because there's probably a setting. It's also doing more stuff now. When I say edit filler words, it's like it says I removed 280 filler words from your 4-minute podcast. And now I'm doing something. I don't know what this something is, but it's doing this extra step. And I was like, I don't like the new extra step, whatever it's doing. So I don't use it enough to have a good opinion on it. And what I've used it for, it's not doing as well anymore. Jim, have you played with it much? I know it does.
I have not, no.
I know you can use it as like a multi-track, bring in the music, fade things up and down, and that whole 9 yards. And I'm paying for it, and I'm barely using it at this point. In fact, there are 2 things. I just updated my Adobe Audition, and I was like, wow, I can't remember the last time I did an episode in Adobe Audition. I loved it. I just don't use it anymore. I have it so I can answer questions.
What are you using now mostly?
Hindenburg, journalist. Love it to death. Oh, so it's chocolatey goodness. Because for my audience, when you go into Hindenburg, like if you go into Adobe Audition and you say, give me an EQ, it'll slap up a 30 brand EQ. When I do this in Audition, and knowing my audience in some cases is kind of boomerish, and they don't know what a 30 band EQ, what to do with it. And I go say, hey, give me an EQ. And they give me a bass, middle, and treble. I'm like, now we're talking, and I can even come in here. You can do some fun stuff and drag these around. So if you want to highlight, you're not going to get as cool as you do in Adobe Audition, but it's pretty easy. And when I go, hey, this has some hiss in it, how do I get rid of it? And I turn up the knob, the one knob, I was like, okay, like that. So it's, and then it does a lot of really cool stuff with, auto leveling and things like that. So for me, and plus it was a one-time fee. I bought it once. It was not cheap, but I don't have the monthly fee that I do with Adobe Audition. So it's a case where it does what I want it to do. And does Adobe Audition have a whole, like, can I take Adobe Audition and have it go, hey, everyone? Yep, I can do that. I don't need that every week though, and I could always hire somebody to do that on Fiverr. So Adobe Audition is great. I mean, I use that thing. I still there's a part of me that misses the multi-level compressor, which I now have a plugin for. I bought Shep's Omni channel, which kind of takes care of that. So, but that's what I use it, and that's why I use it. But Adobe Audition is great. I mean, I still consider it the Cadillac of.
And Jim, what is your go-to DAW?
Well, let's see. Okay, I am bottom of the barrel. So I record right into StreamYard. I take StreamYard, put it in iMovie, and then I export it out. I do the video, and then I export it out an MP4 and an AIFF file and do some processing beyond that. But I don't get fancy. I don't do multi-track. I don't really do that many edits. If I need to do edits, I'll just drop it in Audacity for whatever. I don't use GarageBand, even though I could. But I try to keep it really simple. Like I don't have time to do big edits and stuff. At work, I have the fortunate privilege of I have folks that do that for me. So you better believe they're using Audition and some of those tools to get that done. I don't have to do that. I just send it to them and say, hey, can you make some edits?
Nice.
That's pretty great, right? That is pretty great.
Thanks a lot, guys. You've been very helpful as always.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
I'll have to go watch Pat's video. I just know that's been on my list for a while. It's like
good recommendation.
I need to go watch a video on this because I'm not using it, and I have enough people saying this is pretty cool. So I'm painting with peanut butter right now. Is how I typically describe that. I'm like, it's time to go sharpen the axe, because I got an axe. I could probably do some damage with this. And, I go over and learn it and go, this isn't really what I want. But I know enough people that are starting to swear by it. So, and it does video. That's the other thing. It's like, oh, that's kind of cool. So awesome. But Michael, thanks for stopping in.
All right. Take care, guys.
All right, man. We'll see you.
Michael.
But, man, time flies when you're having fun. Holy cow.
Don't squelch the spammer out there in chat, Dave. Just let him.
Already did.
I know you did. But I wanted to see how far it would go.
We go. Yeah.
I thought it would be something good to talk about, or what not to do.
Yeah.
But it's okay.
He can come back in 4 minutes. I put him in timeout. That's what's hilarious.
Yeah, that's right. So we'll give could be her. So let's say them. Gives them a chance to maybe come back with us.
There you go. But Jim, any ideas on what's coming up on Home Gadget Geeks, theaverageguy.tv?
Yeah. So we, Mike and I spent a little bit of time kind of catching up. I bought a new Ring security cam for the house, and I'm gonna actually let the audience influence me on where I place that it's a backyard. It's for the backyard, kind of see if anybody comes up from the back. And so some great conversation on that. If you're interested in the Ring or the Ring door cams, theaverageguy.tv.
You know what's weird about that is I'm part of a website called Nextdoor, I think it is. It's kind of like hyper local Facebook.
Yeah.
And with people now having security cams, I'm seeing more and more where strange people are walking through people's backyards.
Yeah.
And they're just like, hey, anybody know who this guy is? And they're like,
2 in the morning.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, that's good.
Oh, could you just stay on the sidewalk? Like,
yeah.
Wouldn't that have been easier than climbing somebody's fence?
Yeah. I have, I want to say Waze. Is that a brand?
Yeah. That's a camera brand. Yep.
I have 2 cameras, one for my side door, one for
Wise is what they're called.
Wise. Thank you. That I want to put on my house just because they were on sale. I think that was they're
super cheap.
A Prime Day thing. So,
but good way to get into the cameras.
Yeah. On the School of Podcasting, I have no idea. I will figure that out. I have a couple interviews. I might pull one of those. I have yet to determine what's coming up on the School of Podcasting, but tune in to find out and stick around for some post show.